Well, I'd like to welcome everybody today to our webinar entitled Unilateral is Not Uniform. My name is Will Eiserman, and I'm from the National Center for Hearing Assessment and Management at Utah State University, also known as NCHAM, where the NTRC, the National Technical Resource Center, is housed. And as a part of our NTRC, we frequently have webinars of relevance to the EDI community, and this is one of those. So today's webinar is going to be recorded. So if anything disrupts your full participation in today's webinar, or if you think of people who aren't attending live whom you think might benefit from today's webinar, know that it is being recorded and it will be posted on our website, which is infanthearing.org, in the next couple of days. So remember that you can always go back there, and if there are particular slides that you want to look at again, you can just stream through and advance forward to the place that you want to review again, or you can review it in its entirety. There will also be a transcript available there as well. So keep that in mind. We want to give a shout out to our interpreters and our captioners today. Thank you so much for your talents, skills, and services in helping us make this as accessible as possible. We always appreciate that. Our presenters are going to first give their presentation, and then when they're finished, we'll invite you to enter any questions you might have in our Q&A box, and then I will read them aloud for our presenters to respond to. But please hold your questions until they have wrapped up their remarks, because they may answer your question before they're even done. So we're not going to be monitoring the questions as we go. We'll invite you to do that once they've wrapped up their remarks, and then we'll address your questions or comments at that point. So we have two wonderful individuals from Texas with us today, from the great state of San Antonio. And so I will allow them to introduce themselves. Take it away.
Thank you, Will. So I think I'll go to the next slide where we have some information, and I'm going to let Anna start.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Say. I am a bilingual parent-infant advisor here at Sunshine Cottage. I've worked for 12 years here at our parent-infant program, and we see babies birth to 3 with different types of hearing loss, and we work with their families.
So my name is Logan Horner. Thank you for being here with us today. I know you have a lot of options and a lot of things going on, and I'm so glad that you are here with us today, whenever that is. Thank you. And if you have any questions for Anna and I that we don't get answered during the webinar, you'll see that we have our email addresses on this page. Please email us. We would love to talk to you and converse and find out what you're doing, because I think this topic is one that frustrates and is hard for all of us. So we'd love to hear from you. I've been an audiologist for 16 years, and most of that has been at Sunshine Cottage, but I did do a year working with just cochlear implants. Anna and I also wanted to give some credit when we originally did this presentation and put all of this information together. Melissa Jensen was a part of it. She's not at Sunshine anymore. She is spreading all of her great knowledge elsewhere, but we wanted to give her credit because she really did help us with this information.
Mm-hmm. So for today, We will talk about 5 common unilateral hearing loss profiles. You will learn unique aspects of each profile and how they impact amplification and therapeutic needs. And you will also learn about amplification and intervention plans for young children with unilateral hearing loss. So what makes unilateral hearing loss different? Well, first of all, what is unilateral hearing loss? I'm sure most of you know hearing loss that affects only one ear is known as unilateral hearing loss, right? This hearing loss can range in degree from mild to profound, whereas we have single-sided deafness, which is a form of unilateral hearing loss, where one ear has no usable hearing. And we'll talk more about that right now. So what makes unilateral hearing loss different? Well, first of all, many people think that if you have normal hearing in one ear, then the other ear will make up for the ear with the hearing loss. And this is something very confusing for families to understand a unilateral hearing loss because, yes, the child has one normal hearing ear and will detect sound. Also, families may not see the challenges their child with a unilateral hearing loss can experience in the early years because they may be in a home environment. It's usually when these kids start school where parents or teachers start to notice that these kids experience difficulties in listening and understanding. I've read that children with a unilateral hearing loss may be 10 times more likely to fail a grade in school. So localization and noise. One of the biggest challenges for people and especially children with a unilateral hearing loss is listening in noisy situations. Hearing from a distance is also a challenge. Our adult brains have the capacity to filter out background noise with 2 ears and focus on what the speaker is saying. But a child's brain who is barely making connections, barely making sense of, what they're hearing and these sounds, cannot do that with one ear. Our brains know that where sound is coming from based on which ear receives the sound first. But with a unilateral hearing loss, localizing is a challenge. They may detect, but they will struggle to localize and even understand. We know that children with a unilateral hearing loss have been found to have lower language scores, which in turn impact reading and academic success later in life. Wear time, this is a big one. So putting the hearing technology and keeping it on all waking hours is a big challenge for a lot of our families, especially when it's hard for them to understand the hearing loss when it's not as obvious. A unilateral hearing loss is not as obvious, right, as a bilateral, maybe severe to profound hearing loss. Then it's more obvious. You notice a difference. These kids do have one good ear that's doing all the work. So it's really hard for parents to see these early years that hearing loss. So as therapists, we coach parents and we coach families on establishing routines to achieve full-time use, as well as educating families so that they understand the hearing loss and the impacts it can cause so that they're motivated to put it on more consistently. We see that if families understand why it's important and how it can affect later on, then they're more motivated to put it on. And we've all heard the phrase 2 ears are better than one, right? Well, with a unilateral hearing loss, there is something called a head shadow effect, where the intensity of the sound is reduced when it travels from one ear to the other side of the head. And 2 ears contribute to better listening and improved speech recognition abilities, whereas with a unilateral hearing loss, this is a challenge.
So the 5 different profiles that we're going to talk about are conductive hearing loss. So if a child has microtia atresia, meaning that they don't have an outer ear, and they're using a bone conduction hearing aid of some kind. The next profile that we're going to go over is a sensory neural hearing loss with a mild to moderately severe amount of hearing loss, and they're using a hearing aid. The next one that we're going to look at is severe to profound sensory neural hearing loss, where we have confirmed that they have an auditory nerve and they're wearing a hearing aid. Profound sensory neural hearing loss will be our next profile that we go over, and that's where we have a good auditory nerve and we've received a cochlear implant. The last one that we're going to go over is a profound hearing loss, where we know that we have an abnormal nerve or cochlea, and we're using a bone conduction hearing aid for that.
So the parent-infant program at Sunshine Cottage was part of Odyssey, which you see right there. Odyssey stands for the Outcomes and Developmental Data Assistance Center for EDI programs. And it was funded by the CDC and carried out by a team at the University of Colorado. So we shared all of our assessments with Odyssey, and they gathered and they analyzed this data for children who are deaf and hard of hearing, and they do that throughout for different programs throughout the United States. This is from birth to 6, and so that's where we were able to see these we were able to get these numbers and compare Sunshine, our program, to other programs in the nation. And so you can see on this slideshow that at least in the parent-infant program here at Sunshine, we pretty much fit all of our kids with a unilateral hearing loss, with some type of hearing technology that the audiologist decides is appropriate. So we have a very small percentage of kids who are not fit with some type of hearing technology for a unilateral hearing loss compared to other programs in the nation that may decide not to amplify. You'll see that you can see that the majority of our kids in the parent-infant program either use a bone conduction hearing aid, which Logan will talk about more right now in the next slideshow of why and the cause. So they either use a bone conduction hearing aid or a hearing aid.
So this is just kind of a breakdown to show you at Sunshine, how many kids do we have with the unilateral hearing loss? We actually have a pretty high percentage of kids. So we have the birth to 3 program, but then we also have a day school that has a preschool until 4th grade. Within adding both of those groups together, our parent-infant and our day school, we have around 360 kids. 20% of those have a unilateral hearing loss. So we have a fair chunk of kids with unilateral hearing loss that we work with and try to work with and are confused with and really want to help. So we're going to use some of those kids and how they're doing to help educate us all and hopefully have a good conversation about what this can mean for the child in their development. All right, so we're going to start off with our first profile here. And this is where we have that conductive hearing loss that is because of microtia atresia. So when we look at it for this ear, it's the right ear that has the conductive hearing loss. So this outer ear and the ear canal is not formed. We have no way to get sound to that ear. When we look at the left ear, we're hearing within normal limits, as long as we don't have an ear infection in that ear. And sound comes in within normal limits. This child has a moderate conductive hearing loss, so pretty much a maximum conductive hearing loss for this one. When we do the testing with these kids, we compromise the left ear, and we compromise it by putting a foam earplug in that ear, and then we actually have an ear muff that goes over that ear. And I know that this is not taking away that ear completely, but it's the best way for us to be able to simulate a real life situation of, if you had an ear infection, what would that be like? How can we figure out how this is really helping the child? So we've been using that, and it's been successful for us to be able to do that. So for these kids, usually they're going to use a bone conduction hearing aid on a soft band until they qualify to get the surgery, okay? So bone conduction hearing technology that we use is Oticon Medical, the Ponto, or the Cochlear Americas Baja. Bone conduction technology is great, and it can also be really finicky for these kids. So usually my microtia atresia kids that are wearing a soft band, they are pretty good users of their equipment because they see the benefit, and because we're able to get sound to that cochlea that is working. There are some factors that really influence these kids. A lot of the times when you have microtia atresia, it may not just be the ear that is actually different or asymmetric. So those asymmetries of the face can also mean we have to have some surgeries. So we may have some downtime of hearing. It could also mean that our speech and language pathway, as far as articulation, is compromised. So maybe these kids don't quite have good velopharyngeal closure. Maybe they've had a cleft palate. All of those things are going to influence their development in different ways. So the next profile that we're going to go over is sensory.
Logan, could you speak up just a little bit?
Oh,
please?
sure. Okay, so the next one is that better?
I think so.
Okay. So the next profile that we're going to go over is hearing loss that they have, sensory neural hearing loss that we can actually fit with a hearing aid. So they have enough hearing that a hearing aid can help us get them the access that they need. Because our goal for unilateral kids, like Anna talked about, is to get that brain information from both ears, right? We want that brain to get information from the right and the left side so that it can work together, so that things like listening in noise and distance can be better. So when we look at what that looks like, the right ear in this case is hearing within normal limits. The left ear has this slight sloping to moderate sensory neural hearing loss, and they're fit with a hearing aid. When we look at the picture of the left ear, we know their outer ear is clear, middle ear is good, their cochlea is where the damage is. But we know that auditory nerve, if we can get enough sound to it, is going to send the signal to the brain. So the amplification in this case would be a hearing aid. Influencing factors for this are, could we have enlarged vestibular aqueducts? Maybe we have this slight to moderate hearing loss in that ear right now. Could it change? If it does that mean we could have enlarged vestibular aqueducts in the other ear? And could that ear change? Same thing with cytomegalovirus. If they have CMV, their hearing could progress. And if it does, how does that change our aggressiveness in treating that child and treating that hearing loss? a lot of the times with this, you can have imaging issues. So knowing what is going on with the kid and structurally for both ears is really important and helps us to be able to determine the best course of action. But it can be hard to get imaging on a child. We run into that a lot. We would really like to know what we're working with here, but because of insurance or because of the child's age or risk, all of those things come into play. So it can delay us really knowing what is the best treatment for this type of hearing loss. All right, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is a profile where we have an auditory nerve. We've confirmed that with imaging, but we still have a profound hearing loss. Okay, so that means our hearing loss, when we look at the left ear here, is still just in that cochlea, but the cochlea is fully formed. It's there, but what is inside of the cochlea isn't able to send the information needed to the brain, or as much information that we would like, so that they can truly get information from both the right ear and the left ear. All right, so these usually for us, kids in this situation are kids who are waiting to get a cochlear implant. So things that we have done for kids with this type of hearing loss is a hearing aid, because we want that auditory nerve to be sending the signal to the brain, because the brain needs to be primed and ready for sound. And if we're giving them the sound or giving the brain the sound for that side, even if it's not optimal, it's still creating some really great pathways in there. And those pathways are going to become a slight blueprint so we can build a house on those or build a language structure, which is really important for these kiddos. Another thing that we have started doing is putting a Roger Focus 2, which is a receiver, a phonak receiver that you just wear, and it's open fit. So you put it in their better hearing ear. So they're able to, in the classroom, get the teacher's voice in their better hearing ear so that we're not missing out on some educational information. With that, it's a way to kind of help capitalize on that fact, but not compromise the hearing of that better ear. Another option would be a cross hearing aid. And I'm going to be real honest with you, for cross hearing aids, we have tried them. Sometimes they can be finicky working with our FM system, and that's hard. And sometimes because of how a cross hearing aid works and how they're made, they just can't withstand a kid moving and being a kid. And so we had more breakdowns using that equipment than we did trying some other options. So I still have hope that the cross hearing aid for some families is going to work really well. We haven't had the greatest luck on that. Doesn't mean it's not possible. We just haven't found the right family for that. Influencing factors for this one are similar to the previous profile. So you have enlarged vestibular aqueducts and CMV. Those could be influencing factors that could change things. Again, with unilateral hearing loss like this, we're looking at progressive hearing loss. You always want to be monitoring that better hearing ear. And this is the time when we start counseling about a CI and thinking, will that be appropriate? Is this something that we want to explore to see how a child will be doing with that? So our next profile is when we are using a cochlear implant, okay? So for this profile, we have the right ear where we know the cochlea is not functioning, and they actually have implanted that cochlea. When we look at this, you see the left ear is hearing within normal limits. The right ear has that profound sensory neural hearing loss. When we look at the A's for this profile, you see that they're within that slight to within normal limits range. So they're truly getting good benefit while using that cochlear implant. Where if we look at the previous profile, you saw their benefit was more around the mild to moderate range for that ear when the better hearing ear was compromised. So amplification, a cochlear implant, advanced bionics, cochlear Americus or Med-L. Again, you're going to be looking at, do we have enlarged vestibular aqueducts? Do we have CMV? Do we have something that could cause this to be progressive? We have, depending on the child's insurance and their age, it has been tricky for us to get implantation within the last few years before they're 5 or 6, which is hard on all of us because we know that their little brains are primed to take in good information and use it when they're younger. So I think the more we're doing research and the more we're seeing these kids do well, I think the age for unilateral implantation will change and we'll be able to get that easier. But right now, it can be tricky for this to happen. We find that doing some testing in different situations and trying to really prove and show the benefit that the hearing aid is giving versus the potential benefit of a cochlear implant is important for getting this approved. So the next profile that we're going to talk about is no auditory nerve. So we're going to use a bone conduction hearing aid. So how this one is different, when we look at the left ear, we're hearing within normal limits. For the right ear, testing and imaging has shown, okay, outer ear is clear. Middle ear is clear. No infection, no abnormalities. And you know what? That cochlea is working. We have been able to test the cochlea and know that those outer hair cells are functioning. Imaging shows that the cochlea is fully formed. But then our auditory nerve isn't sending the signal. Another way that you would be in this situation is maybe the cochlea isn't formed. Maybe there's an absent cochlea and absent auditory nerve. If that's the case, and we know that if we even put a cochlear implant in here, the nerve can't send the signal, or if the cochlea wasn't formed enough for a cochlear implant to send a signal, then the best way to help this child hear would be wearing a bone conduction hearing aid and capitalizing on the fact that the child's brain will learn that sound, even though it's always going to go to the better hearing cochlea, the sound that comes from this side where they're wearing it is different. So the child's brain figures it out that sound is different once it gets over here, okay? So when we look at this and see, how are they able to hear? What we find when we compromise, in this case, the left ear by putting that plug-in muff, these children are hearing within normal limits to a slight loss. But again, we're relying on this left ear for that. All of the information is being fed directly over here. And then the brain is figuring out how that works, okay? For the child to truly use the brain and the neural capacity there, they need to be wearing it so that that brain can be able to learn and produce those good pathways. And that can be tricky. That is one of our biggest things with our unilateral kids is actual usage time of the device. So for amplification for these kids, we talked about the bone conduction hearing aid. You could also use the cross hearing aid with these kids and the focus to receiver in their better ear. You know, we really want these kids to just have access to the sounds they need for that language development. We want them to be able to hear their peers in any situation. And so really thinking about how can we best get the kids that information? How can we best get their brain that information? Big influencing factors for this population is localization. So can they identify where a sound is? Is that bone conduction hearing aid giving them what they need to localize sound? And if it is, that's great. We love that. But then how do they do in noise? The only place that a child is truly in a quiet environment, well, maybe not the only place, but one of the only places, is in an audiology booth, in a soundproof booth. So we need to do testing in noise to say, okay, how much benefit is this giving the child? How can I simulate a real life situation so that we know, is this working? Is it worth it? Is it going to make a difference for them? And then go from there. So Anna is going to go over some habilitation things of what she helps families guide and mentor them through.
So as far as frequency, we see our children with a unilateral hearing loss and their families twice a month for therapy. But we also provide opportunities each month for parents to connect with other families in our program by hosting what we call parent group meetings, where we provide dinner and babysitting. It's a pretty good deal for families. They come in, we feed them, we take care of their kids, and they're able to connect with other families in the program. And it's not just parents. We invite the whole family. We invite grandparents. We invite babysitters, you know, whoever is spending time with their children, because it's also important for them to understand. And we talk about different parenting topics, and then we try to tie it into hearing loss. And parents really do learn a lot from other families, especially because they're the ones living this, you know, they can relate in their journey. So sometimes parents have better suggestions on what's working for them to keep the hearing technology on. Sometimes just even coming in and seeing that there are other kids with hearing loss and wearing the same type of device just helps them accept the hearing loss. You know, sometimes parents think they're the only ones, and so it's harder to understand and to accept that hearing loss. So for habilitation, we educate families on outside therapy services. Yes, we are providing mostly auditory verbal therapy, but we also, you know, we want to educate them on the other early intervention services that are available to them. So, you know, we try to connect them to their early childhood intervention agency and see what other services they qualify for, especially with a hearing loss. Then we know more than likely they're going to qualify for speech, because a hearing loss can affect speech and language. You know, but sometimes kids have other things going on and they can qualify for additional services. So their ECI agency can provide that if they qualify. We also want to connect them to the deaf and hard of hearing teacher from their school district. And there are also other private or home health agencies, you know, where these families can get these services that we can connect the families to. A great part of the habilitation is coaching families to monitor and to adjust their listening environment and always position themselves on the child's better hearing ear, especially when they're spending time with their baby, when they're interacting, when they're going to play with their baby. especially when we're waiting for hearing technology. Sometimes we get babies right when they're born at, a month, sometimes even less than a month, and we're maybe waiting for hearing technology. Then, that's when it's really important for parents to know to position themselves on their child's better hearing ear. We coach families on, again, monitoring that listening environment. For parents to be aware, is the TV on? Am I about to play with my baby and talk to my baby, but is the TV on? That adds background noise, which makes it harder to hear. Is the dishwasher on? Maybe they're next to a fan. I have some families who just have silent noise running all throughout their house, and their brain is used to it. They're used to filtering out that sound. But for a baby, they cannot do that. We want to cut down on those background noises and ensure that when somebody's talking to them, that they're hearing their voice as best as possible. Sometimes we coach families, maybe you can go into a quieter room if there's a lot of people in one room, when you're going to have that one-on-one time with the baby. In each therapy session, we practice listening to the link sounds, working from detection to discrimination to can a child identify, and then eventually, does the child comprehend what he's hearing? Can they tell us what they're listening to? And for this, we use the earplug and then the earmuff. And I have an earmuff right here so y'all can see. When a child uses a hearing aid or a cochlear implant, we also connect directly to via an FM system or a remote microphone to better stimulate that hearing ear. And we do this in order to reduce participation of the better hearing ear when we're assessing and working on auditory skills. That's when we use the earplug as well as the earmuff, or for a child who has a hearing aid or a cochlear implant, then we can connect directly using either that FM or that remote mic. In our therapy sessions, we also focus on the child following directions without the use of visual cues. We know with a unilateral hearing loss, the child will detect they have one good hearing ear. But just because they can detect doesn't necessarily mean they understand and comprehend what they're listening to. And so that's why we really work on those listening skills. Can the child follow directions and commands from simple to more complex commands when parents are not pointing? We encourage families to use their personal remote microphone, especially in noisy environments like the car, the park, the grocery store, restaurants, in order to improve the signal to noise ratio. And this is when parents get the child's personal hearing technology and they have that remote microphone, sometimes they forget they have that. So reminding them even to bring it to sessions just to get them used to using it. Sometimes that's a good tool or a great strategy, having the parent wear it, because it's a visual reminder for the parent too to talk to their child, especially if maybe the parent is not as, talkative. As far as struggles, like Logan and I have mentioned before, the biggest struggle we see is the lack of wear time. So a great part of our time with families is coaching these families to achieve that full-time use. When we see the audiologist, we can also look at the data logging to get an approximate amount of time that the child is using their hearing technology, and then we can set some goals. We never want to try and, look at it in a negative way. It's always a useful tool to just help these families, one, have an idea of about approximately how long are they putting it on, how long is their child wearing it, and then what is going to be the next goal, right? And we always try to set reasonable goals. We're not going to go from 1 hour of wear time to 10 hours of wear time. What is doable for these families? And we're going to be working that, setting new goals every time we see them. Because children with a unilateral hearing loss take some time to achieve that full-time use, we do see that they have a hard time paying attention and listening. So my favorite strategy to work on when working with families is alerting the children to sounds and reminding them to listen by pointing to our ear. And then asking the parents to, consistently, remind them by pointing to their ear to listen. Now I'm going to go on to tracking tools. So in our parent-infant program here at Sunshine Cottage, we use what we call the castles, and we have different levels. This is the pre-sentence level. Castles stands for the Cottage Acquisition Skills for Listening, Language, and Speech. And we can track kids from birth to when they're older for cognition and play skills, listening skills, expressive language. So we're consistently using the castles, and this is where we set most of our goals for listening and then for language. We also use the Little Ears auditory questionnaire. For assessments, we use the DAISY, the Developmental Assessment of Young Children, and this looks at all of the areas of development. We're looking at cognition, we're looking at self-help skills, but we're also looking at receptive and expressive language. It's really important, yes, we're concerned about language, both receptive and expressively, but we also want to make sure that the child is developing appropriately as a whole, and is not behind in other areas of development, because then that can affect speech and language as well. We also use the MacArthur-Bates Communicative Development Inventories. We start with the words and gestures, and then it moves on to words and sentences, and then we have the MacArthur 3. And the MacArthur just looks at language, from receptive language to expressive language. We know that there are a ton of other auditory checklists and other language assessments like the REAL, but this is what we use here in our program to track our kids with any hearing loss.
Well, first I'm going to unmute myself. And now we're going to go over kind of our audiology unilateral testing battery. So this is it written out step by step. I'm going to go to the next slide because it actually has some scores of a child that I think will make this a little easier to understand and show you why we see benefit in it. So, the first thing we're always going to do is do unaided testing and then make sure that the child's hearing aid is programmed to meet their hearing loss. We use DSL targets, and then we use simulated targets to make sure that we're meeting those. So after we've done that and validated their hearing technology, we're going to test them in their everyday listening condition. So that's with their hearing technology and their better hearing ear. So as you see with this little fella, he was wearing his Baja and then he had his right ear open. And he did very well. He has typical hearing, so if I test him in sound field with that equipment, he does very well. With his Baja, and when we plug or muff the better hearing ear, his scores actually decreased in the lows and in the highs. But he still did fairly well with that because he's a really good listener. But when you look at how his SRT is, so how soft could he repeat back a word, he went from 0 to 15, which is a 15 dB jump. So the next thing we're going to do, I love that I can have these numbers to look at across the frequencies for the audiogram. That's great. But is it practical? This child just goes around hearing those beeps and whistles for me, right? So how does he do with words? I want to know, how much access does he have? So the first thing we'll do is do testing in that everyday listening condition at both a typical hearing level and then a soft level. So this little guy got 100% and 96%. I like to tell families when we do at this soft conversational level, this is going to tell me how noisy, how nosy can your child be? How much can they overhear? Because that's really important. We want them to be able to overhear language. They don't just hear it back and forth. They need to be able to overhear it. So this little guy, he's very nosy. He can hear 96% at a soft conversational level. The next thing we do is add noise into that. So we did multi-talker babble, which is a lot of different people talking in the background and single words with a 0 dB signal to noise ratio. He got 80% with just his Baha on and his right ear. When we add in that personal assistive hearing technology, so like an FM system, he gets 96%. So you can really see that that helps him and gives him that benefit to improve that signal to noise ratio in noise. The next thing we do is we compromise the better hearing ear. So this would be if the child has an ear infection in that better hearing ear. They're going to need to rely a little bit more on the other ear. So in quiet, 96% did really well. Once we add noise into it, you get 76%. So you can see it really becomes more challenging when the better hearing ear is compromised. And a lot of the time for kids, they will get an ear infection. They could get an ear infection that lasts for 4 to 6 weeks. That's going to really affect their ability to listen in the classroom, at home, socially, all of those things. The last thing we usually do with kids is do the same testing with no equipment. So the child we'd take off, in this case, the child's Baha, and we would have them listen to single words with multi-talker babble. And you can see for this guy, who in his everyday listening situation could get 80% of that, when we take away that Baha in the same situation, he gets 0%. So noise really affected him. Another thing that we start to see in the green and the red situations, so when the ear is compromised or we're not wearing a Baha, is their ability to sit and participate becomes impaired. They are moving all over the place. They're leaning forward. They're trying everything with their bodies to make it easier. You're turning your better hearing ear towards the speaker. All of those things really come into play that I'm sure all of you have seen. All right, so our last slide here is just an infographic that we made to kind of help us be able to counsel families and think about, oh, how does this really work? How do you show this visually when it's so hard to see as you're just with a child who is hearing you? What does that mean for their brain? So over here you can see we have the noise. Noise, when you have 2 ears that are working, goes to both ears, right? Speech goes to 2 ears. Our brain's ability to focus out and remove the speech and remove the noise and separate them so that our brain can distinguish, okay, I want to listen to the speech and I want to ignore the noise. It's easier right? Because we have it coming from two places. So you can better figure out what is important. When we have one ear, you have speech and noise going towards that one ear. So then when we look at this, you see that the noise really overshadows the speech, and the speech overshadows the noise. It doesn't know what is important. So having this is just kind of a funner way to be able to have the conversation about what it means for the brain and what it means for listening. So Anna and I would be more than willing to share this with you. If you want to send us an email, we'll send it to you via PDF so you can have it to use if you think it would be helpful. What we really wanted from this presentation for you guys is just to give you some information about what we are seeing and what we have found is helpful. This is our last slide. So if you guys have any questions, I think we do have a few moments for those. So thank you for being here. We appreciate you taking the time to be here today.
Thank you, both of you. Wow, it looks like people have been submitting questions all along the way. Okay. So if you have questions you'd like to submit, you can use the Q&A box now, and we'll start to address the questions that have come in. Are your email addresses going to be on the screen there anytime?
We can move back to the slide where they were. Will that work?
Yeah, that would be great. So that those were on the screen, that would be great. Okay. Why is here's a question for you. Why is the term loss being used when the child was born with this particular hearing level?
So you're right, it is their born hearing level, and that probably is what we should be using. That is probably me misspoking and probably years of using the word loss, but we should be saying that this is their hearing level. You are completely correct.
Well, I think for people who are really new to this world, that word, the terminology hearing loss, is more like intuitive to people, even though it may not be exactly accurate. I think people continue to use it for that reason, in my experience anyway. Okay, the next question. Will they also, let's see, I've had parents ask if it's confusing for the child to hear CI sound along with the normal hearing sound for the unaffected ear.
Oh, that's a great question. And so here is my take on it, and working with kids who have gone from having a hearing aid and then go to using a cochlear implant. Children's brains are amazing because they figure it out a lot faster than we do. So we, think, oh yeah, that would be really, really confusing because we have that all preconceived notion of it should be this and this. A child's brain figures it out so fast that even though it is different, their brain loves it because it's more information for it to work with and build those pathways. So most of the kids that I work with, it's not confusing to them. It is confusing for a few weeks, like it would be for any of us who get something new. But they figure it out, which is just amazing.
And also take into consideration the brain plasticity these early years, right? The earlier, the better, because their brain, that becomes their normal.
Here's the next question. Wouldn't a child with a present functional cochlea, but a pathology of the auditory nerve benefit from a cochlear implant versus a hearing aid?
That would depend on the actual function of the nerve. So sometimes the nerve, the function there isn't enough to give them a good stimulation. So that's where you would really have to look at doing some trials to see, okay, how much is that nerve functioning? Because until you actually would do the surgery and find out how well the nerve is functioning, sometimes we don't know. And parents don't want to take the chance of having okay nerve function. So I would say it's kind of on a case-by-case basis for that, of looking at the auditory nerve and the benefit there.
The next question is, what do you do in instances of unilateral auditory neuropathy?
That is a great question. Most of these kids, when we are in this case and we've done a hearing aid trial and maybe not seen it be as successful, we have gone ahead and done the implant to see if that will help. And we've only had, I think, 2 kids that have done this, and I've seen a benefit in each of them. One of them got very good benefit from the cochlear implant, you could tell. The other one, just the fact that we cut off that loop of having a different sound kind of coming through. So just the cochlear implant surgery itself, in between having the surgery and then the initial activation, which takes place about 2 weeks later for us, you could see a benefit just by that, by just taking away that input that was coming from the auditory neuropathy, which is kind of amazing. So before even activating the implant.
Would you mind to expand the acronyms for ECI?
So ECI stands for Early Childhood Intervention.
Okay.
And the agency depends on where they live.
So several people have been asking about the single earmuff. Can you show that again and tell people where they might look to get one of those?
So we put a link on us showing you, but on the top of, let's see, this page, Alpine Hearing Protection, that's the muff that we've used. And it comes with 2 muffs, and you can take them off and move them around, which is great.
This one says earmuffsforkids.com too.
So the next question, do you encourage the introduction to sign language?
So at our school, go ahead, Anna.
Yes, like Logan was gonna say, our program is truly listening and spoken language. That doesn't mean we discourage families to introduce sign language. Sometimes their therapists from early childhood intervention are introducing basic signs. But especially when we're working on those auditory skills and trying to figure out, is the child comprehending or not, then at those times we do limit the visual cues. That doesn't mean the parent cannot continue to learn sign language and communicate with the child using sign language. It's different because for a unilateral hearing loss, we know they have a normal hearing ear and they have potential to develop listening and spoken language.
So this next question is, I also have a question on the budget for your monthly parent connection dinners. How do you fund that?
Ooh, that's a question for my director. I honestly, I know the food, it can be expensive every month, providing dinner for our families. We have about 120 families enrolled, but not everyone comes to our parent groups. Sometimes we have anywhere from like 15 families come to our dinners, but then the kids come and sometimes we have one parent, sometimes we have two parents. So it still adds up. We do have a budget. I cannot tell you how much per year. And so our director is in charge of that budget, and we try and find cost effective but also yummy dinners to provide to our families.
I have to tell both of you, there are so many remaining questions that we're not going to be able to get to. And unfortunately, we're at the top of our hour. But your emails are on the screen. So those of you who have unanswered questions, I'm so sorry we didn't get to them. But you can contact Anna or Logan through their email addresses here if you'd like to inquire further. Before everybody runs off, those of you who are participants, if you look in the chat box, you will see a link to a short evaluation survey that will also generate a certificate of attendance to today's meeting. So a webinar. So if that matters to you, that's how you can get a certificate of attendance for today. And I want to, obviously thank Logan and Anna, our interpreters and our captioner today, for helping us make this be as accessible as possible. That link is in the chat now. Just look there now. Some of you are quicker than we are in telling us. Let's see. Many people are saying that they can't see it okay, it's there now. All right, everybody take a breath. It takes time for technology to refresh. All right, so the link is there. Click on it and you'll be able to get a quick evaluation survey that will generate a certificate of completion. Thank you, everybody. This webinar has been recorded and it will be posted on infanthearing.org in the next couple of days so that you can go back and look at any of the slides that you wanted to think about further. And also, if there are individuals whom you think would benefit from today's webinar who weren't attending live, this is a great way for them to go and access the same information. So thank you, everybody, again, and have a good week.
Thank you.